One impulsive act of mercy was all it took to dismantle the ordinary life Calla Reeves had spent 6 careful years assembling, and replace it with something she never saw coming and couldn't walk away from. She wasn't supposed to be at the Sable Foundation Gala in the first place. Calla was an ER nurse at Rush University Medical Center, 3 years post-graduation, and still carrying $89,000 in student loan debt that chased her into every paycheck. The bartending gig at the Chicago Art Institute was Meredith's, her roommate, who had called at 5 p.m. in tears about a stomach bug and begged Calla to cover. The hourly rate was double what Calla made on day shift, and the tips from the kind of people who attended $5,000 a plate charity events were the stuff of nursing school legend. She'd said yes before Meredith finished the sentence. Now, standing behind a polished mahogany bar set beneath the grand hall's soaring, vaulted ceiling, Calla couldn't decide if agreeing had been smart or catastrophic. The gala's theme was Ilunax Chicago, a benefit for the city's underfunded pediatric hospitals, which was the one part of the evening Calla actually respected. Everything else felt like a different species of reality. Women in gowns that cost more than her monthly rent drifted through the hall like expensive ghosts. Men in custom tuxedos discussed quarterly returns and wine vintages with the glazed confidence of people who had never once had to choose between groceries and a utility bill. Calla poured champagne, smiled when required, and let her training do what it always did in crowded rooms. Quietly categorize, assess, monitor. That was how she noticed him. He was standing 30 feet away near the base of the east staircase, partially shielded by an architectural column. He held a crystal tumbler of bourbon, and the conversation he was having with 2 other men in dark tuxedos had the low, controlled energy of something serious being conducted in a festive space. He was tall, north of 6 feet, with the kind of physicality that made the surrounding crowd unconsciously give him more room than anyone else. Dark hair, slightly longer than the standard Pfeiffernace world cut. A jaw that looked like it had been designed with architectural precision. He was exactly the type who didn't need a name tag, because everyone in the room already knew who he was. Calla wasn't looking at his face. She was looking at his hands. The left hand, resting loosely at his side, was trembling. Not violently, not the kind of tremor that would register across a crowded room. But Calla had spent 3 years watching hands in the ER. She knew the difference between nervous energy and neuromuscular dysfunction. His fingers were cycling through a fine, rhythmic shake that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature of the heated gallery. She watched him raise the tumbler to drink, and her breath caught. His grip was slightly off. The kind of micro-adjustment a person makes when their fingers aren't quite responding the way their brain intended. His complexion, visible even under the amber gallery lighting, had gone 2 shades too pink. Not the flush of champagne, but the vasodilation of something systemic. And his eyes, which she could see clearly now as he glanced briefly around the room, were wrong. The left pupil was slightly wider than the right. Anisocorias of unequal size. Combined with the tremor and the flushing, Calla's brain ran the differential in about 4 seconds. Anticholinergic toxidrome. Not a seizure, not a stroke. Something he had ingested, something someone had put in his drink. Her gaze flicked immediately to the room behind him. A server in white gloves was moving through the crowd, carrying a fresh tumbler on a silver tray. The server's eyes weren't scanning the room the way a server's eyes were supposed to. They were fixed, locked on the man by the column with a focused, purposeful intensity that had no business existing on the face of a catering professional. Calla had been in enough trauma bays to recognize the difference between someone doing a job and someone completing a task. She didn't deliberate. She grabbed the nearest open bottle of red wine from the bar, stepped out from behind the counter, and walked directly into the approaching server's path. She hit him at a diagonal, bottle forward, precisely angled, and the contents of a 2019 Barolo splashed magnificently across the front of her white uniform shirt. The server stumbled, the fresh tumbler on his tray tilted. "Oh, God, I am so sorry," Calla announced loudly, loud enough for the people around them to turn and look, which was exactly what she needed. She caught the tilting tumbler with her left hand, clean lift, and set it on a nearby cocktail table as she bent to retrieve the bottle. The server stared at her with a jaw so tight it could have been structural. His eyes told her he understood precisely what she'd done, but 20 people were watching, and he had no move. "I'll get you a towel," Calla said pleasantly, and walked away before he could respond. She reached the man by the column in under 30 seconds. She stepped directly into his line of vision, cutting off the conversation with the two suited men with a confidence she absolutely did not feel. "You need to come with me right now," she said quietly, keeping her expression completely neutral. "You've been given something. I'm a nurse. Don't argue with me." One of the men behind him moved immediately, a hand sliding toward the interior of his jacket. The tall man raised 2 fingers, just 2, barely a gesture, and the movement stopped. He looked down at Calla with grey eyes that were sharp despite the early-stage toxicity she could already see settling into his system. His gaze moved from her face to the wine stain spreading across her shirt, then back up. "Lead the way," he said. His voice was low, measured, completely unbothered. She took him through the nearest service corridor, past a startled caterer, and into a supply room off the main kitchen. She shut the door and went to work. Her bag, a small trauma kit she clipped to her tote out of her habit, came open on the folding table. "Sit down," Calla said. "What have you had to drink tonight?" 2 pours of the scotch they're calling a bar menu. He sat on a metal folding chair with the ease of someone accustomed to strange places without explanation. When did the tremor start? He looked at his hand. 20 minutes ago. I assumed it was fatigue." "It's not fatigue. Your pupils are asymmetric, your skin is hyperflushed, and you're losing fine motor precision." She pulled out a syringe. "Cardiac conditions? Arrhythmias?" "Nah." "Allergies to medications?" "Nah." "I'm going to give you a low-dose physostigmine analog to counteract the anticholinergic effects. It works fast. You'll feel nauseated for about 2 minutes." She was already swabbing his forearm. "The person who poisoned you is still in that room, and he saw my face. Whatever your situation is out there, we handle that after this." He watched her work with an expression she couldn't name. Not fear, not relief. Something calculated and quietly fascinated, like a man cataloguing an unexpected variable. "You carry an antidote in your purse," he said. "I carry emergency supplies because I'm a nurse, and I've learned the world doesn't pause for hospitals." She administered the injection and pressed a gauze square to his arm. Pressure there. 20 seconds later, the tremor in his fingers slowed, then stopped. He exhaled once, controlled. "Who are you?" Calla asked. "And what did that man want from you?" The supply room door opened. 2 men filled the doorway with the particular density of professional violence. The one on the left had an old scar cutting through his brow. His eyes moved from his employer to Calla and settled there with cold, measured assessment. "Boss," he said, "Mises' people are still inside. We need to move." 1 minute. The tall man stood and straightened his jacket with the unhurried ease of someone who had never panicked. He looked at Calla. "Your name?" "Calla Reeves." "Calla," he said it once, as though filing it somewhere permanent. "You just saved my life." "You were dying in a room full of people and no one else saw it," she said. "That's a reflex, not a favor." Something moved through his expression. Not quite a smile. "I'm Luca Ferrante." The name landed like cold water. She'd heard it exactly once, from a detective who'd come through the rush ear 18 months ago after a dockside shooting. The detective had used it carefully, the way people said names they were cautious about. The Ferrante name attached to shipping contracts, union negotiations, and 3 federal investigations that had produced 0 indictments. The kind of name that lived in the breathing space between legitimate enterprise and structural shadow. The most protected and most feared man on the eastern side of Chicago. Calla stood very still. "I see," she said. The server you stopped works for Zoltan Mihis, Luca continued, watching her absorb the information with complete composure. Mihis has been attempting to eliminate me for nearly a year. Tonight was simply more elegant than his previous efforts. He picked up his jacket. He saw what you did. By tomorrow morning he'll know exactly who you are, where you live, and where you work. I live in a studio apartment in Wicker Park, Calla said, her voice steady even though nothing else was. I'm a nurse. I have nothing to do with any of this. You do now. He said it without apology and without flinching. Not by choice, by circumstance, and I won't pretend otherwise. He held the door. My cars are at the service entrance. We need to leave before Mihas's people work out where we went. She looked at him for a long moment. His grey eyes didn't move. She picked up her bag. The night outside was cold and wet, November in Chicago performing its annual civic duty. 2 black Escalades idled at the service curb. Luca's hand came to the small of her back briefly, not grabbing, not demanding, simply directional, and guided her toward the second vehicle. They were 30 seconds from the door when she heard it. A sharp, compressed crack from the roof of the adjacent parking structure, then another. The scarred man grabbed Calla's arm and pulled her hard toward the Escalade. The windshield of the lead vehicle fractured in a starburst. Someone was speaking rapidly into a radio in clipped, urgent Italian. Luca was already at the rear door, one hand on her shoulder pressing her below the window line as doors slammed and the engine roared. The Escalade tore down Michigan Avenue at 60 in a 30 zone. Calla sat pressed against the door with her knees pulled to her chest and did the thing she always did when her body entered shock. Inventory. Check your hands. Check your breathing. Assess what's hurt. She was fine. The man in the front passenger seat was not. He had gone very quiet, very quickly, which, in Calla's experience, was always more alarming than noise. The scarred man, she'd heard someone call him Raphael during the scramble, had slumped against the window. A dark stain was spreading across the left side of his jacket. Raphael, Luca said sharply. Still here, boss. The voice was thin, far too thin. Calla was already moving, climbing into the front compartment, 2 fingers pressing to Raphael's neck. His pulse was there, rapid and weak, the shallow racing rhythm of significant blood loss. She got the jacket open and found the entry wound high on his lateral chest. Clean perforation. No exit wound she could locate in the moving darkness. He needs a hospital, Calla said. Mihis has people watching the ERs, Luca said from behind her. The anger arrived before she could contain it. Then he bleeds out in this car. There's a medical facility at my location, fully supplied. Staffed by whom? Luca's voice was even. Tonight, you. Calla kept her palm flat against Raphael's chest and did not say what she was thinking. The facility was in the basement level of a building in the West Loop, a structure that presented itself externally as a disused commercial warehouse and contained, behind a biometric door 2 levels below the street, something that looked disconcertingly like a private intensive care unit, stainless steel surfaces, overhead surgical lighting, a crash cart with its seals intact, a supply cabinet that made the trauma bay at Rush look underfunded by comparison. She had 40 minutes before Raphael's pressure would make everything significantly harder. Wash your hands to the elbow, Calla told Luca, now. He obeyed without comment. She worked the way she always worked when the situation exceeded the resource, fast, methodical, specific. She talked herself through each step out loud, because talking kept her grounded, kept her hands steady, and her thinking linear. She located the bullet's trajectory with the portable ultrasound she found in the cabinet, established 2 large-bore IVs in under 4 minutes, and hung blood from the refrigeration unit along the wall, because of course Luca Ferrante's private underground medical facility had O-negative blood reserves. Of course it did. When she finally stepped back, Raphael's pressure had stabilized. His color was still poor, but poor in the way of a man who'd taken a bullet tonight, rather than poor in the way of a man about to lose the argument with it. Calla stripped her gloves, dropped them in the biohazard bin, and sat down on the floor with her back against the cold wall. She pulled her knees to her chest and let herself breathe for the first time in 3 hours. Luca finished washing his hands at the sink. He dried them, walked over, and sat down on the floor across from her, back against the opposite wall, elbows resting on his knees, and looked at her. Not at Raphael, at Calla. "I've spent 20 years surrounded by people whose entire function is to keep me alive," he said. "Not one of them saw what you saw tonight in that room." Calla looked at the ceiling. "I saw someone who needed help. You intervened in a poisoning attempt, a room full of witnesses, intercepted a second dose without anyone noticing, talked a mafia boss into a supply closet, administered emergency treatment from a kit you carry in your purse, and just performed field trauma stabilization on my lieutenant in a moving vehicle." He paused. "All of that, and the thing you lead with is that you saw someone who needed help." She lowered her gaze to his. "What else would I lead with?" Something shifted in his expression, not softened exactly, but recalibrated, like a man encountering a variable his existing models couldn't account for. "I need to go home," Calla said. "I have a shift at 7. "You can't go home. Not tonight." He said it without apology. "Mihis knows what you look like. He knows the uniform you were wearing. If you walk back out to Wicker Park tonight, you don't make it to morning." His voice was flat, factual, without the performance of threat. "I'm not telling you this to control the situation. I'm telling you because it's true, and you deserve to know the truth of what your choices tonight cost you." Calla was quiet for a moment. On the monitor above the surgical table, Raphael's vitals scrolled across the screen in slow, steady, reassuring peaks. "And you'll dismantle Mihis's network," she said. "Yes." "How long does that take?" "Days, maybe less." His grey eyes stayed on hers, steady, certain in the way of a man who has never issued a promise he didn't intend to keep. "You'll be able to make your rounds, Calla, I give you my word." She looked around the room. The surgical lighting, the cold tile floor. The man sleeping against the wall who was alive right now because she had moved toward a problem when every survival instinct said step back. She thought about the server's eyes, fixed, purposeful, moving through a crowd of people who saw nothing at all. "One night," she said. The words settled in the space between them, like the opening measure of something that had no intention of remaining brief. Luca stood, slow and deliberate, and extended a hand to help her up. His grip was warm, calloused in the same places she'd seen on the construction workers who came through the ER after accidents, but the hands themselves were careful, like a man who understood exactly what his hands were capable of and chose otherwise. "One night," he agreed. He didn't say what Calla was already beginning to understand. That one night was simply what the next thing always called itself at the beginning. That by morning, the woman who had covered a friend's bartending shift on a Wednesday in November would be something the city had no name for yet. Something woven into the Ferrante world as permanently and as irrevocably as the trajectory of a bullet. And the most unsettling part, the part she refused to examine directly, not yet, was that when she thought about walking back out into the ordinary world, into the studio apartment and the 7 a.m. shift and the $89,000 in debt and the predictable, manageable shape of her life before tonight, what she felt was not relief.